The U.S. marks its latest trade deal, this time with the European Union.
This doesn't portend well, very well for Canada.
It's the tariffs that Canada has put on goods coming in from the U.S. that are hurting the people in Alberta the most.
There is no longer a country called Canada, only a lonely nation named Ottawa. This phrase, once dismissed as political theater, now echoes with unsettling truth. As global powers like Japan and the European Union race ahead with new trade pacts with the United States, Canada finds itself dangerously isolated. Worse still, the unrest is no longer limited to average citizens. The country's own premiers, the pillars of federal unity, are now openly clashing with Ottawa. What we're witnessing is not just a political rift, it's the slow unraveling of a nation's core.
Unfortunately, for Canadians, the stakes are far too high. The affordability crisis is very real. We are in a vulnerable position.
At the latest meeting of Canada's premiers, frustration boiled over. Ontario's premier didn't hold back, declaring, "We buy more U.S. products than Japan, China, the UK, and France combined. We're their #1 customer, and we shouldn't have to beg for respect." Alberta's voice was even sharper. While Ottawa waits for negotiations, we lose billions in exports and jobs. Quebec joined the chorus, blasting federal inaction as not just weak, but dangerous. These are not isolated complaints. This is a coordinated message from Canada's provinces. Enough is enough. The trust is gone. Ottawa is standing alone. While Canada waits, the U.S. has already finalized deals with Japan and the EU, both securing major tariff reductions, especially in auto exports.
I think it's the biggest deal ever made. Thank you very much.
The baseline 15% tariff rate granted to them stands in stark contrast to the looming 35% Canada now faces on key exports if no deal is reached by August 1st. President Trump, speaking bluntly, said, "We haven't had a lot of luck with Canada. Maybe there's no negotiation. Maybe it's just a tariff." For a country once seen as America's closest economic partner, that's not just a warning, it's a public demotion. In Windsor, auto plants are reducing shifts. In St. Catharines and Oshawa, supply chain delays are stacking up. Small manufacturers say they're already absorbing losses from steel and aluminum tariffs. Farmers in Saskatchewan, exporters in Quebec, they all report rising costs, dropping confidence, and fewer trade routes. For the past decade, Canadian businesses thrived under predictable NAFTA-era terms.
That's what the MOU is about today, is how can we find a way to support each other, and then in addition to that, find a way to get to new markets.
Today, they operate under a fog of uncertainty, while Ottawa urges patience that industries can no longer afford. Confidence is collapsing, investment is drying up, and workers are paying the price. Across social media, a wave of frustration is swelling. Buy Canadian slogans have turned into sarcastic hashtags. People ask, buy what? The shelves are empty or overpriced. Consumers feel trapped, paying more for less with no leadership in sight.
Premier Smith and Premier Moe said, we have to be leaders in the G7 when it comes to our economy, and we need to unleash every tool in our Canadian toolbox and tell the world that Canada is open for business.
Many accuse Ottawa of chasing the illusion of a perfect deal while letting real opportunities vanish. Even staunch federalists now echo provincial sentiments that Ottawa no longer understands or serves the everyday Canadian. The anger isn't just about trade, it's about identity and a feeling that the country is slipping away from its people. Canada is at a crossroads. While Ottawa still clings to the belief that the right deal will come, the provinces are moving on. Premiers are no longer asking politely, they are demanding autonomy, demanding action. The longer Ottawa waits, the deeper the rift grows. What remains is not just a gap in policy, but a canyon in trust. And if this trajectory continues, what we'll be left with is not a nation, but a lonely capital called Ottawa, surrounded by provinces already charting their own course toward a different future.
Yeah. So, August 1st is going to come. We haven't really had a lot of luck with Canada. We have the confines of a deal with China. But we haven't really, we don't have a deal with Canada.
It's the middle of summer, but the temperature between the United States and Canada has never been colder. Just days ago, President Trump signaled something few expected to hear. The U.S. may no longer be interested in reaching a new trade agreement with Canada. Instead, he hinted that tariffs alone might do the job. The message was simple: Washington is done waiting. As he boarded Air Force One for a trip to Scotland, Trump's decision marked a turning point. With the self-imposed August 1st deadline fast approaching, The United States is preparing to hit Canadian goods with a 35% tariff unless a new deal is signed. But on the other side of the border, Canada isn't blinking. Prime Minister Mark Carney and his team made their stance clear. Canada will not sign a bad deal, no matter the pressure. At the heart of the current standoff is a paradox. The Canada-US-Mexico Agreement, or CUSMA, is still in force. Under this agreement, over 90% of Canadian exports to the US face zero tariffs, assuming they comply with rules of origin. But the reality on the ground is shifting. Section 232 tariffs on steel, aluminum, copper, and auto parts remain in place with some rates as high as 50%. And now, with the threat of an across-the-board 35% tariff, Canada faces a second layer of economic pressure that exists outside the CUSMA framework. These measures have had a chilling effect on Canadian industries and raised questions about whether the U.S. is still honoring the spirit of its trade commitments.
I think the president is trying to up a little pressure on Canada. We saw this in the case of Japan as well. So I think he's still posturing a little bit, trying to create an environment where Canada might be willing to give up a little bit more.
This isn't the first time Trump has used tariffs as leverage, but this time, Canada isn't giving in. The Prime Minister's position is supported by provincial premiers and trade officials. Their consensus, a rushed deal made to avoid a tariff deadline, is more dangerous than no deal at all. Trade Minister Dominic LeBlanc echoed this view after high-level meetings in Washington, emphasizing that any agreement must deliver long-term stability for Canadian workers. Meanwhile, Carney continues to resist short-term pressure tactics, arguing that Canada needs structural guarantees, not just temporary relief.
So Canadian companies that sell things to the United States, almost 30% of them are now redirecting to other countries. So they're starting to diversify who they trade with.
The political battle is spilling over into the economy. According to a July 2025 report by the Canadian Chamber of Commerce, nearly 30% of Canadian exporters have already begun shifting trade away from the U.S., and 37% of companies say they are now sourcing components and inputs from non-U.S. suppliers. This isn't just a short-term pivot. For many firms, it reflects a deeper shift in trust. After decades of economic integration, Canadian businesses are hedging their bets, diversifying markets, reducing reliance on American buyers, and building more resilient supply chains. And that may eventually cost the US too, because when Canada rewires its trade model, America loses not just a customer, but a partner. So why isn't Canada racing to sign something before August 1st? The answer lies beyond the headlines. In 2026, CUSMA faces a mandatory joint review, an opportunity to revise, restructure, or even renegotiate the entire agreement. For Carney, that review is the real battleground. And to enter it from a position of strength, Canada cannot afford to settle now. Sources close to Ottawa suggest the government is preparing a broader economic security framework for future negotiations, one that ties defense cooperation, Arctic sovereignty, and clean energy into the trade equation. In that context, a quick fix with Trump could weaken Canada's position in a much larger game. The August 1st deadline is looming, but no agreement is in sight. The United States is preparing to raise tariffs. Canada is preparing to absorb the blow. What we're witnessing isn't just a tough phase in a long relationship. It may be the beginning of a fundamental shift. Trump is demanding results now. Carney is planning for what comes next. And the space between those two strategies? That's where the future of North American trade is being rewritten.
We're working very diligently with Europe, the EU, which covers a lot of territory, a lot of countries. But we haven't really. We don't have a deal with Canada. We haven't been focused on it.
Just days before his self-imposed August 1st deadline, President Donald Trump said it out loud. The U.S. hasn't really been focused on Canada and might not even reach a trade deal. It wasn't just a shrug, it was a statement of disregard. In the middle of high-stakes negotiations, Trump dismissed America's largest trading partner as an afterthought. He hinted Canada could simply pay the tariffs with no real negotiation. To many in Ottawa, this wasn't a threat, it was a signal. Because unlike his approach with Japan or the UK, where pressure was carefully escalated, This moment revealed something else: impatience. And that impatience may have just handed Canada a strategic edge.
Yeah, and the first thing everyone needs to do is exhale, because what the president just said there actually lines up very consistently with what we heard from Canada's negotiators on this.
For weeks, the Canadian government has worked to manage public expectations. Prime Minister Mark Carney, Minister Dominic LeBlanc, and Ambassador Kirsten Hillman have all echoed one message: Canada won't rush into a bad deal. Trump's public remarks ended up confirming that very narrative. When the US president openly admitted a deal may not happen, he gave Canada cover. Now, if talks break down, Ottawa won't take the blame, because Washington walked away first. It's a rare case where silence from Canada was matched by a loud concession from the other side. For Ottawa, that's a communications victory, even without a signed agreement. Trump's comments also put his own trade team in a difficult position. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick and U.S. Trade Representative Jameson Greer have been actively engaging with Canada, describing talks as constructive and productive. LeBlanc has spent days in Washington, meeting with senators and senior officials. Yet, as his own officials were making progress, Trump sent a different message to the world. Negotiations might not matter at all. This internal contradiction weakens the American position. It allows Canadian officials to question who holds the real authority and to slow-walk discussions until a coherent U.S. stance emerges. The more fractured the American message, the more leverage Canada gains. But perhaps the biggest consequence of Trump's remarks won't be felt this week. It'll come in 2026. Under the terms of the USMCA, the agreement must undergo a mandatory review that begins with a Free Trade Commission meeting, expected by late 2025. Trump's team has already signaled plans to use that review to push for stricter origin rules, immigration clauses, and supply chain controls. However, if the U.S. imposes 35% tariffs on Canada now without achieving a negotiated outcome, that strategy may backfire. Canada and Mexico will be able to argue that tariffs have already failed as leverage. Worse, Trump may find himself entering the 2026 review with less credibility and fewer tools. Meanwhile, Canada is preparing its own parallel track, a proposed security and economic agreement to solidify its defense commitments and regional cooperation. That deal, still in early stages, could give Ottawa a new foundation for talks and weaken Trump's ability to dominate the agenda. What looked like a warning may actually be a leak. Trump likely believed he was turning up the pressure. But by speaking too soon and undercutting his own negotiators, he exposed the cracks in his trade strategy. He gave Canada a narrative it can control, a pace it can set, and a reason to delay until the balance shifts. There's still time for a deal, but if there isn't one, it won't just be Canada that pays the price. Trump's own credibility, heading into 2026, may be what gets taxed next.